I've been going through a work from Martin Luther, the OG, not the civil rights leader, called Concerning Rebaptism. And I've taken a few notes from just, reading this superficially. And in his arguments, Luther goes from point to point on his interactions with the Anabaptists, which he didn't really have, and for context's sake, he really did not have the best interaction with Anabaptists, seeing as they were Munsterites and others. But one of the first points he makes is the Anabaptists will argue, how do I know that I am baptized? Which, in modern mainstream evangelicalism, you can see the easy train of thought that goes, how do I know if I'm baptized? How do I know if I'm saved? In that cultural context, almost everybody in Europe, because Europe was, comprised of the Holy Roman Empire, Christian nations grouped together, everybody was baptized. So a lot of these Anabaptists would ask, how do I know I am baptized? And you can see that translate into, how do I know I'm saved? But Luther makes an argument by saying, asking that question is equated to, how do I know that this woman is my mother or this man is my father? Which easily brings us to the question of identity as it relates to baptism, or baptism as a form of identity. So we're going to get into, I'm going to make a few videos on this, and then also end and conclude with just my own treatise. God willing, we have the time and we can do this. But Luther goes on to write that there is still some good in the Catholic Church, granted that it is an error because of such things as the papacy, monasticism, celibacy, the terrible abuses of transubstantiation and the like. And so he says, granted it is an error, but there is still some good in the Roman Catholic Church, namely baptism. But that's why there was a separation. There's a reason for the Reformation. It was as if we had separated from a grandfather, so to say, and we were established in our own boundaries. He goes on to say that if we question our identity, we are questioning who our authority is. If we question our identity, we question our authority. The context is that Luther came across the radicals, including the Munsterites, and he said that Anabaptism was an opportunity for the devil. Again, speaking because he saw this example from the Munsterites, who, again, the Radical Reformation, as well as the Anabaptists in that day, they forsook family, they sold everything, they would divorce their wives, they would start completely over, and they would, quote, Luther says, go to heaven altogether alone, end quote. So obviously this is an extreme, but it speaks into the fallacy of separation doctrine, which is still prevalent in many Anabaptist and Baptist circles today. I just spent some time up in New York, and I was able to see some of the Mennonite society. Whether they were beachy or not, I could not tell, although I think they were kind of liberal, because we went to Mennonite market, and to see Anabaptists in their natural environment, I kid around, but you see the parallel society notion there. So with this, anyway, getting back to what Luther says that faith is founded, according to this Anabaptist logic, Luther says that faith is founded or built on experience. Therefore, he argues that the Anabaptists are in error because personal experience and personal testimony is a terrible metric for faith. Luther quotes Colossians 2:23, but he goes on to say that the casting off of sacraments, if it is to be done, needs to be supported by Scripture. Further, he says, what is at stake? What is at stake here in the question of rebaptism is faith in God or faith in man. He uses an example. When we were born, was it a human invention or imagination? Meaning, was it real? And there's, I have a quote for that I can put in the description below. But he goes on to say that it is a work of God. Nobody can say that this man or this woman is not your father. Nobody can say that, well, because you weren't present at your baptism, it didn't happen, because baptism speaks a better word than we ever could, because we were baptized into Christ. Therefore, it is a work of God. So not believing man, we believe God. Because baptism is a work of God, it can never be controverted by the devil or man. God is our authority because God marries himself to us. What God has joined together, let no man tear asunder. We repeat that at weddings. It's even more true in baptism. Romans 13:1, Luther quotes, and he says, based off of this, I have a superior, and therefore I am subject to that superior. So baptism speaks into every area of life, but also in the form of identity, I am a subject, and the form of authority, I am subject to that superior. Again, then he says, I must believe the testimony. If I am to believe the testimony of my identity, it is to be that it was a work of God. He constantly refers back to baptism just being a work of God. He says, I am God's, and he's the only authority. So conclusion, Luther gives the conclusion, is it the same with the papacy as with parents? Of course not. To Luther, the Pope is already fallible. The Pope is already a position that cannot be explained by Scripture, so therefore it's nonsensical. So the Anabaptists are reacting to something false already, according to Luther. And they cannot, and again, this is key, they cannot prove why rebaptism is necessary. For example, Luther, he asks the question, and he says, if he cannot ask what a thing is, then it does not exist. If he cannot ask what a thing is, if it does not exist, then why does it demand an explanation? So that's a medieval logic tool that Luther uses. Luther then affirms baptism is a work of God again, the same with communion, and the same sacrament because there are witnesses. The sacrament demands witnesses. And he offers a very beautiful analogy bringing the two, Deuteronomy 19:15 and Matthew 18:16 as a harmonious example. And then concludes with, he sins against God who does not believe he's baptized when he was. He then goes on to explain why the first baptism is sufficient and why rebaptism is unnecessary. So he says, first he asks, there are people who can witness to the fact you were baptized, and no one can contradict or prove the opposite. So basically he's saying, don't cut off your nose to spite your face to the fact that there were witnesses. A sacrament is, to quote O. Palmer Robertson, a sign and seal sovereignly administered by blood between God and man. It's shared, and it is a sacrament because communion, baptism, and circumcision are all the same. So the conclusion means we must fall back on the testimony of others. We see this in marriage, and Luther gives a beautiful example about marriage, which I'll share in my next video.